Okay.
so much for showing up. We Merediths love to celebrate what our wonderful kids are learning. And I know you did not show up to hear me speak. You showed up to hear Tom, Sam, Rob, and T-Rex speak. So you should all have a list of what they're going to talk about. And I think Tom has started the video camera for those who are not here personally.
No, yeah.
Yes, you did start the, okay, we're sure it's working. Okay, so with that, let's give a round of, also let me tell you, at the end of each present, you come on in, you come on in.
Come in.
Well, all right then, there's
Yeah,
you
okay.
come sit down.
That's what I was
Me and
expecting.
friends and Nana, Karen, Papa, Nick, you just come right in. You're right on time. You come right in. We're glad to have you. There's 3 front row seats. My parents have been living here for what, 9 days now? Which is enough time for Mom to know everyone by name. She's one of the most capable, extroverted, friendly people in my life. So I was just explaining that we're a home educating family, and every year we have a presentation so they can learn their practical public speaking skills and things like that. You can sit right there. Yep. And so after each person presents, there will be a Q&A time just for that person. So you do not have to ask questions of everyone, but we always love it if each speaker gets at least 3 or 4 questions. Tell me more about this, or I wonder about that. That's just good for them. And with that, I will now introduce the youngest, Timothy Rex Meredith.
All right, so first I'll be reciting a poem, "O Captain, My Captain," by Walt Whitman. This was written to celebrate the ending of the Civil War, but also to mourn the death of Lincoln. O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes that steady keel the vessel, grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 with the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. O Captain, my Captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribbon wreaths, for you the shores are crowding, for you they call those swaying masts, their eager faces turning. Your Captain, your father, this arm beneath your head, is its own ring, but on the bed, fallen, cold, and dead. My Captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse, no will. The ship is anchored, safe and sound. Its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor ship comes in with object one. Exalt, O shores, and ring, O bells, that I, with mournful tread, walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen, cold, and dead. Now I will recite Philippians 2, verses 1 through 11. If then there is any encouragement in Christ, if any consolation of love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by thinking the same way, having the same love, sharing the same feelings, focusing on one goal. Do nothing out of rivalry or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. Make your own attitude that of Christ Jesus, who, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be used for his own advantage. Instead, he emptied himself by assuming the form of a slave, taking on the likeness of men. And when he had come as a man in his external form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on a cross. For this reason, God also highly exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of those who are in heaven, and on earth, and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God.
on the table.
A pointer.
Alright, so Napoleon Bonaparte is known for his military victory and his small stature, mostly. In 1769, Napoleon was born on a small island called Corsica, just off the coast of France. Napoleon, as a child, was rebellious and did not like his French. He did not like the French. But as his family was minor nobility, he was able to be sent off to France to be in a university. In 1785, Napoleon graduated from the university as a second lieutenant in the military. Now, because France was a monarchy, positions were given off not by skill, but by nobility. So, Napoleon wasn't really able to rise the ranks of the military because there was no chance for him, because he didn't have as much nobility as all of the other people. But in 1789, the French Revolution began and gave people just a bit more equality. So in 1793, Napoleon was promoted to a general. He was even given his own commanding fleet, his own armada. Okay. Napoleon quickly rose the ranks, eventually selling the Louisiana Territory to America, and shortly after, crowning himself Emperor of France. Napoleon, at this time, was beginning to get a bit too powerful for all the other European monarchs. So, in 1814, they exiled Napoleon to a small island called Elba. However, less than a year later, Napoleon returned from his exile and reconquered France. In one instance, as he was marching back to the capital of Paris, the forces that were sent to capture him joined him and said, "Long live the emperor." However, in 1815, that same year, Napoleon was exiled again to the island of Saint Helena. Napoleon lived out the rest of his days there, dying in 1821. Now, I'll present the difference between deciduous trees and evergreen trees. So, most people know that trees exist. But there are a way of defining trees is whether they are deciduous or evergreen. Deciduous meaning that in the winter, they store their nutrients in their trunk and roots, and their leaves fall off and die. Evergreen meaning they store their nutrients in their leaves, in their trunk and roots, lose their nutrients. However, most people don't stop to think about what evergreen trees really are. Most people think that evergreen trees are all evergreen trees are conifers, meaning they have needle leaves and they hold their seeds in cones. However, this is not true. An example of this is the rhododendron tree, which is evergreen. It stays green all year, and it has flowers, which it holds its seeds in.
How tall was Napoleon?
He was 5'3", average height for his time.
Do you consider Napoleon a good or bad leader?
He was a good leader
And why?
because he was very charismatic and he commanded the total respect of the streets.
Why did you select Napoleon?
Because he's really interesting. Really good thing to talk about.
What was his wife's name?
Joseph. What's the name of his wife?
Yeah, it was. His wife, okay.
What's the name of his wife?
Yeah.
T-Rex, do you know who defeated him at Waterloo?
Who defeated him at Waterloo?
Do you remember the armies that defeated him at Waterloo?
Question on yours,
Now I don't know, I forgot.
Sorry.
How did they exile Napoleon?
They captured him, but they sent him out on a boat.
Should we do when they exiled him versus just killed him? I mean, I don't know.
Well, some people do believe that he was assassinated, in 1821, but there's no way to know.
I haven't read a lot about Napoleon specifically, but I have read a lot about the French Revolution. And the idea that leaders would just get killed is kind of offensive to most world leaders. So that may have had something to do with it, may not. I don't know.
And he was too popular. Like,
Well, I
they were
wonder
afraid
if
of
that was the reason why that would cause an uprising if they were to assassinate him.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask you two questions, but they're
Okay.
both easy questions. The first one is, did you choose your own memorization or was it assigned to you?
I chose my own.
So your poem and your scripture are both your choices?
Yeah.
What do you see is the advantage of memorizing them when you could just look at them on a phone or a computer
Well,
anytime?
So when you memorize something, it gives you the skill of being able to listen and pick up on things really quickly, and memorize them. So it's a really good skill to have when you're listening to people, so you can catch on to what they're saying. Yeah.
The Prussians and the British, the Duke of Wellington, defeated Napoleon.
Do you know where is the island where they put it?
Which time?
The first time and then the second time.
First time and the second time?
Yeah, no, maybe
That's okay, that's okay. That was an impromptu question, you know a lot, you've done fine.
Corsica's in the Mediterranean, and then I think
Corsica is where he was born.
Which is,
Not there. No.
Coastal what?
That's Asia. There you go.
There you go, there you go.
He was exiled closer to
Elba
Africa.
is also in the Mediterranean, I'm pretty sure. And I would be surprised if St. Helena.
Saint Helena, I think, is off of Spain. 'Cause he was, I think he was once in the Mediterranean exile, and then the second time off of Spain.
That's Spain.
Which tree would you get under? You wouldn't get under any tree. A deciduous or an evergreen tree? Well, deciduous trees, their trunks are dead, so their trunks will light on fire way more easily. So it's a deciduous tree. Would be better. Because the embers catch on fire.
What's the tree?
You go under an evergreen, because it's sap and
Well, the sap is flammable.
it doesn't water and it's ground.
That's good.
Can everyone see the outline of Florida?
No.
No.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's it.
Good enough. You can take it.
Good thing you told us.
Yeah.
It is Florida.
Yeah.
You can just imagine it. You
We
can't see
we
it.
can imagine, we see it.
Introduce yourself
Okay.
if you're done.
I am Robert Louis Meredith, you can call me Rob, and I am 14. I had a birthday recently, and I love being a part of the Meredith family. This is, I don't know, I've been doing this since I was 2, but I'll just get on with it. Stop procrastinating. The Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. 407 years ago, our fathers set forth onto this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We are now engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, nor any other nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on the great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to dedicate ourselves to the unfinished work which those who fought here have given their last full measure of devotion. It is rather for us, the living, to dedicate ourselves that those who lived here those who died here shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 13. If I speak the languages of men and of angels, but do not have love, I am a sounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so that I can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I donate all my goods to feed the poor, and if I give my body to be burned, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, is not boastful, is not conceited, does not act improperly, does not keep a record of wrongs, finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends, but as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for languages, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put aside childish things. For now we see indistinctly as in a mirror, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully as I am fully known. Now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Okay, this is Florida, as I have already said. And Florida, I would say, has one of the most interesting histories of the colonization of it, of all the states in the Union. For most of the history of the land, it was inhabited by dinosaurs, and then people, and then much later, in 1513, a man named Ponce de Leon, a Spanish explorer who was a member of royalty, came to the Gulf of Mexico in search of a fabled fountain of youth that was said to give you immortality. He led a group of a few ships and not very many people, and he landed in what is modern day St. Augustine, right about there. Everyone see that green dot on the map? More or less? Okay.
Yes.
He didn't find the fountain of youth because there was no such thing. And so, disappointed, he left Florida, but while he was there, he gave it the name La Florida, which comes from the name of a Spanish Easter festival. When he left, he went to be governor of Puerto Rico for a while, and in 1565, he returned to Florida and established a permanent colony in St. Augustine, which is now the longest lasting, constantly inhabited colony in all of North America. It still has people to this day, and it's one of the biggest cities in Florida. But sadly, when Ponce de Leon came to Florida, he got distracted and got killed by Native Americans. But over the years to follow, after he claimed Florida for Spain, Floridans would go on to conquer and establish colonies throughout most of the eastern peninsula. And over the course of the century, by the 1700s, they had pretty much all of Florida Spanish. But the Spanish would not keep Florida forever. In 1736, after the 7 Years' War, or commonly known as the French and Indian War, Spain lost their Puerto Rico colony and their Philippine colonies to Great Britain. And in order to gain those colonies back, they decided to give their Florida colony to Britain because the Puerto Rican and Philippine colonies were much more valuable to them. So, Florida became British. And it was British for about 20 years. And while it was British owned, the Britons established many farms and plantations and irrigated a lot of the land and killed some native people. But everyone did that, so nothing new there. But then the American Revolution came along, and Spain indirectly helped France, which to them counted as them contributing to the Americans on the side against the British. And so when the British lost, they said, we want Florida. And the Britons couldn't really do anything about it. So Spain got Florida back after the end of the American Revolution. So for the most part of the early American years, Spain occupied Florida, but in 1818, Andrew Jackson led a series of campaigns against the Native American population, and he continued them down into Florida, where he attacked cities and towns and burned lots of places. And by that point, Spain had a very small grip on Florida. So after Andrew Jackson had invaded a lot of it, they decided to give it, not back, but the first time to the U.S. I'll take off this Spanish Florida. And it was now occupied by the United States of America, which it remained just a territory for a while until in 1845 it became a state. It joined the Union, and it was the size of what it is on the map. But when it was occupied by the Spanish, it was much bigger. The Florida territory continued all the way into here, which my map wasn't big enough to draw on, so. Anyway, unfortunate planning. But soon after it joined, it left the Union in 1861 to join the Confederacy and fight in the Civil War. But after it lost the Civil War, it asked and succeeded in regaining membership to the United States. In 1865 was when it rejoined. 1868 was when it rejoined. And it has been a state since then in the U.S. It's had many governors. Its first governor was Andrew Jackson, right after he conquered it. But since then it's been the United States, so. Over the semester, I have had many classes at Bristol Academy. Bristol Academy is where I've taken most of my high school classes. This has been my first year of high school, and I've enjoyed it a lot. A class that stuck out to me as being, well, my favorite class was the current events class. And this was partially due to the content, but also due to the amazing teacher. My dad spent so much time preparing a lesson about a new country to talk about. The name current events might seem misleading because it was less American, well, no American current events at all. It was all international current events. We learned about countries and regions such as South America, Europe, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Middle East, India, China. But throughout the course of the semester, one country stuck out to me a lot. This country is El Salvador. El Salvador is not a very big country. It is located right, I'll just point with my finger, right here, in purple if you can see it.
You can't see
It's very
it.
small.
See it.
It's very small.
Yeah.
Use the point you're covering.
Okay, so it's right here, where the end of the pointer is, and it is very small, very, very small. But in 2015, it had the highest murder rate in the world. It was known as the murder capital of the world. It had a very corrupt leader, and it had had a series. It had had a series of corrupt and authoritarian presidents that didn't fight against and sometimes cooperated with violent gangs such as MS-13 and MS-18, which specialized in illegal drug trades and murdering whoever they wanted and other bad things. But in 2019, El Salvador saw a new president. Nayib Bukele was born in 1981 in the capital of El Salvador, and although his family had only been in El Salvador for a few generations, maybe one or two, it originated from the Middle East. He knew firsthand what it was like to live in a bloody country. He was born in the midst of the El Salvadorian Civil War. In the very same year that he was born, the El Motes massacre occurred when the El Salvadorian government killed over 811 citizens. But when he took office in 2019, he was elected by 53% and ran as a third party. So proving the country wrong that third parties couldn't make it. But when he was elected, he started instituting reforms. And in response to a big upsurge in MS-13 gang violence, he put the country into a state of emergency and arrested over 6,000 gang members in just 1 week. Now, you may be thinking, 6,000 is a lot. And it is. It is a lot. El Salvador did not have a lot of prisons because it hadn't been arresting a lot of people before that. So, the summer of that year, Nayib Bukele began construction on the largest prison that the world would ever see. It would be able to hold over 40,000 inmates, 40,000. And it would be to hold all of the criminals because Nayib Bukele was not going to back down from all the violence that was occurring. So in January of the next year, after it was built, it just took a few months, it received its first, it received its first inmate transfer of 2,000 people. So since then, it has received many, many more inmates, and Nayib Bukele has decreased the murder rate by a lot and made it one of the lowest in the world since then. And he has made El Salvador a better place to live. He has made the economy better. He has decreased the gang population. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting about him was that a lot of the issues in El Salvador he depoliticized. He made it less about I'm right and you're wrong, and more about we need good principles, and we need to be united against the problems that we have. In a speech that he gave, I think it was in his inaugural speech, he talked a lot about good values, the importance of having family and religion at the center of your household. And he talked about how big countries that were great were founded on principles such as these. And when they lose their principles, these principles, they start to fall. So, Nayib Bukele has done a lot great for El Salvador, and currently he has the highest approval rating out of any democratically elected president in the world. It's just over 90%. And I guess that's about it.
So it is a democratic country now?
It is, yes, he was, funnily enough, the election was pretty free and fair. Yes,
Is that a primarily Catholic country?
I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, it is. Dad taught the class, so he knows a lot about that.
When you choose a mate, I want you to recite 1 Corinthians 13.
When I what?
Choose a mate.
All right, I will. I will.
To
Yeah.
build on that, when you think of the qualities described in 1 Corinthians 13, which of those qualities do you think is hardest to live out?
All of them. One that sticks out to me is being patient. You know, especially when, you know, your younger siblings are being really annoying. Am I taking them all?
You only have one younger sibling.
Oh, I
You
do?
can't
I
say
didn't
your
realize.
younger siblings and, yeah,
Okay.
you don't know exactly what you're talking about.
Don't worry, Rob, I agree with you.
All right. I walked into that one. All right. Any other questions?
Good job.
Sam?
What do you mean when Andrew Jackson just kind of went into Florida? Why was that?
Why was that? Well, because he didn't really care about Spain, and he didn't really like the Native American population, the Indian, I think they were called Seminoles, the largest native population, or I guess they weren't really native because they too immigrated just long before the British and Spanish and Europeans did. But yeah, he invaded to attack them.
What made you pick Florida or something like Tennessee or like Texas?
Well, because I've already done a presentation on Texas, and my mom won't let me do 2 of the same topics at all. It doesn't even have to be the same year in a row. If I do it once, can't do it again. But Florida, didn't really know much about it. All I really knew when I started researching it was that it used to be Spanish, and it was one of Spain's prized possessions, and they gave it to the United States. Oh yes, and I have relatives there. I have relatives there who are on both sides of the family. So that's great. I have them from Mancari and Pompanac, which I forget their names, but Aunt Catherine should say them.
And you have them from Brenda, from Londa.
I do?
Yeah,
Wow.
I'll give you a flip.
Oh yeah, that's true. Okay, I have relatives on my dad and mom's side, apparently. And both of my parents on my mom's side? Oh, just one. Okay.
All right, who's the current governor?
Florida? Ron DeSantis.
Okay.
Yes. This is his 2nd term. And when they elected him for the 2nd time, they changed it 2 more years because they were hoping he would run for the presidential office.
Do you know why the Spanish didn't really care about Florida?
Not exactly.
This is all hearsay, but this is a long time ago when I actually studied this. But I think what it was from was where they landed at St. Augustine, if you like where it was over there. When you go to the left, which is what their initial reaction was, I'm pretty sure that was all marshes and mudlands. And so then they walked into that and they were like, No, and then they just
Yeah.
instantly went back to the city and lived on the
A
coast.
lot of it was
Yeah.
not populated for a while. In
Yeah.
fact, a lot of it is still not populated because it's inhabited mostly by wetlands and very bad places to put house foundations on. And, yeah, alligators, which, okay, there are 2 million alligators in the state of Florida. Okay, but alligator deaths are, I think, like 1 or 2 per year. But so if alligators really wanted to eat and kill humans, they would do it a lot more because they have a very big population.
Like Andrew Jackson.
But yes, kind of like Andrew Jackson, which he had a small population of only 1, but he still managed to kill a lot of people. But alligators, they don't really have very much interest in people because we're very tall and kind of intimidating to them, and we are kind of odd to them because we walk on 2 legs and most of their prey walks on 4, and also because we don't really walk near them, and they aren't aggressive. So most of the deaths are related when a dog falls in a lake and then the person jumps in to save their dog, or if they're walking right next to the shore, just casually, where there are signs that say alligator, please don't walk close to the water.
There's a lot of pathos now.
There are a lot of what?
Pathos.
Pythons. Pythons. Yes, there are a lot of non-native pythons, restrictors. Yes. Yes, and he is, I think. Yeah.
T-Rex has had his hand up.
Oh yeah, T-Rex.
Yeah, so when you say that Spain conquered France, did it have to fight any wars?
Spain did not conquer France. It was the French-Indian War, and Spain
Oh, I mean,
lost.
conquered Florida.
Spain conquered Florida.
When you did,
Well, they didn't really have to do much conquering because most of the fighting population that existed there were spears and clubs, and yeah, not a lot of armor.
They settled it.
They mostly settled it. Yeah, that was really what they did. But they didn't settle a lot of it because it was very hard to settle. Mostly marshes and alligators and more marshes, more alligators. They didn't have a lot of flat land for plantations. Any other questions?
Do you think anybody will ever discover the fence?
Sadly, I don't really believe in that. If you want to go searching for it, you can go to the Florida Everglades. Just walk around in the marshes, up to your knees in the beware of alligator waters. I would have no problem. I would not object. You could go there if you want, to your own demise, searching for the fountain of youth. Thank you. Sam, you want some more? You want some more, Sam? Yes, please. I'll leave it. My name is Sam Meredith. I am 16, and I will begin by reciting Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a helper who is always found in times of trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth trembles and the mountains topple into the depths of the sea. Though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake under its turmoil. There is a river. Its streams flow from the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Lord Most High. Yahweh, the God of hosts, is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Come, let us see the good works of the Lord. He ceases fighting among the nations. He breaks spears and shatters swords. Cease your fighting and know that I am God, exalted among the nations, exalted on the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. For my poem, I did not get the opportunity to pick something nearly as impressive or elegant as T-Rex or Rob, but in our choir class, we would repeatedly hear this poem given by one of our directors.
and it was especially meaningful to me. Written by Charles Wesley a long time ago, it goes as follows. The common things of every day, God gave us speech in a common way. For the deeper things we think and feel, God gave poets words to reveal. But for the heights and depths no words can reach, God gave us music, the soul's own speech. The first thing I'll present to you today is a speech about Andrew Mellon, a character mostly unknown, however significantly important. Born on March 25th, 1855, Andrew Mellon was born in Pennsylvania. He was born, and his father owned a large banking company, one of the largest in the nation. However, it began to decline as his father got older and older. When Andrew Mellon was 23, he took over his father's business, and in 10 short years, it became the #1 banking company in the nation. His career in banking was successful, but not nearly as successful as his time as Secretary of Treasury. In 1921, Warren Harding appointed Andrew Mellon to become the Secretary of Treasury. This was shortly after World War I, after the nation had accumulated $26 billion in debt. After raising taxes to as high as over 60% income tax on its peoples during World War I, and accumulating this much debt, not many people knew the best way to fix it. But Andrew Mellon was extremely intelligent when it comes to his finances. He led the country in a period of eliminating the debt by reducing the government spending and reducing taxes. His opinion and belief was that by reducing taxes, more people would buy more things. If something costs less or is less regulated, you're more likely to build it or to buy it. And in that period, with that philosophy, he allowed for the Roaring '20s prosperity. Under the advice that he gave to Calvin Coolidge and the next president, well, Warren Harding died pretty quickly after being elected, a couple weeks, I think. But Calvin Coolidge became president in his place. And Calvin Coolidge was the great minimalist. He did hardly anything as president, but that was his philosophy, was that the president's job was not to use his power to do a bunch of stuff, but it was rather to do what the people needed. And if that meant that he passed a bunch of executive orders, that doesn't really seem like his job. So Calvin Coolidge focused on reducing the government control over the economy. Now, as you may see on this side of the board, Black Monday, 1929, the Roaring '20s stopped roaring. Andrew Mellon was the Secretary of Treasury at this time. And it's hard to believe that the Secretary of Treasury, who could have been so good, also allowed for one of the greatest crises in American history. However, the Great Depression was not Andrew Mellon's fault. He reduced the national debt to zero in just 4 years. And after those 4 years, up until this point, he was producing a surplus every year for the government. The problem of Black Monday and other consecutive following incidents that led to a worsening and worsening economy was largely against his advice. The president mostly ignored all the different things that he told him to. And there was even a part where the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which was arguably the greatest cause of the Great Depression, was about to be signed. And before it was signed, Henry Ford made a personal trip to the White House to explain to the president that if this bill was signed, the Great Depression would not only worsen, but become worldwide and cripple the nation's economy for a long time. The bill was signed, however, and the Great Depression continued to worsen. He did leave office in 1932 after Roosevelt had stalled the progress of the Great Depression and removed him from office. I believe he was 81 when he was removed from office. Sri Lanka, an island of a country that is quite small. Few of you in this room know the name Sri Lanka. Probably only 5 of you could point it out on a map. I will point it out for the rest of you, as it is an Asian island below India. Sri Lanka remained a British colony until the colonial period ended around World War II. And at that time, it became a country worthy of great admiration. Having variety in its landscape, it was also one of the best places in the world to view blue whales. It was a hotspot for tourism and attraction, as it held elephants, lions, and giraffe in certain parts of its land, and in other parts had volcanoes and even rainforests. It is a beautiful island. However, problems arose after a civil war between the Tommy and another party, which I don't remember the name. However, the civil war was over a dispute that the Tommy wanted their own region of Sri Lanka to be their own. They fought for many years, and most of the infrastructure that they had been rebuilding was destroyed. After the Civil War, however, there was a great amount of prosperity and focus on recovery. Most of the citizens knew how horrible and hard it was during the Civil War, and were very willing to put in the extra hours after work to rebuild the town hall or to replant the gardens and help people out. It was a very loving and kind country. Sri Lanka was home to producing over 25% of the world's cinnamon, over 50% of the world's sapphire, and many other precious metals. Its natural resources that it held allowed it to grow and grow as an economy. But during COVID, it crashed. Along with terrorism and COVID, the tourism industry in Sri Lanka totally plummeted. That is where they got a lot of their money from, along with selling their exports. Their economy began to crash and plummet. After COVID-19 was mostly resolved in Sri Lanka, the leader decided to make things worse when he determined that Sri Lanka was going to be the first organic country in the world. Every plant grown in Sri Lanka must be all organic. No more chemical fertilizers. All the farmland in Sri Lanka was devastated for years as farmers began to struggle to grow exports in addition to growing their own food. The economy began to plummet and plummet and plummet, and as it was tied largely to the American dollar, and the American dollar its dollar was overvalued, the economy began to plummet worse and worse. So even though Sri Lanka is home to some of the best blue whales, delicate cuisine, and some of the most beautiful waterfalls that you'll ever find in the world, their economy and leadership is allowing it to be currently one of the biggest disasters in the world.
Is it called Sri Lanka or Sri Lanka?
I mean, you can say it either way. I don't know how they say it in Sri Lanka, though.
This is not Sri
Oh, I don't know if I had this one.
Rob?
Let me think about that.
I think the civil war was between the Tamil Tigers and the Buddhists.
They have a different name, and I don't think it was the Buddhists. Although Sri Lanka is a largely Buddhist country. Very famous for that. It's another reason why it has a lot of tourism. Yes, I'm happy.
In the soul's own speech, you said it was meaningful to you, so
Yes.
please elaborate on why.
I feel like music has always been something that's really spoken to me in all the concerts and the different things that I've been to. And this past semester, when I've been in our choir and the different songs that we've been able to sing and participate in, it really has been speaking of the soul to this. So.
There's a University Carnegie Mellon, is that the same Mellon?
I believe so. So he actually, a lot of the things he did later in his life, he founded the National Art Gallery in his time as Secretary of Treasury, and he donated the largest collection of art to that treasury, along with doing other charitable projects. So he was a very noble guy. Yes.
Do you have any idea why he didn't listen to Henry Ford? Coolidge didn't listen to Henry Ford?
It wasn't Coolidge at the time. I wish I should know the name of the president.
Hoover?
I think so.
Well, Hoover was, why didn't he listen?
There was a lot of pressure from his party to pass it. So the tariff basically eliminated foreign exports. It was, in a sense, a trade war against the rest of the world because it raised tariffs on imports to an insane amount. And the local businesses might have wanted that because then all of their goods are going to be bought. But in the same way, it's horrible for our economy because then the local companies can rise their prices. We don't get any of the imports. And what ended up happening is the other countries embargoed us. Really the reason, a lot of people don't know, but it still is undetermined, but it's a lot of the party pressure is probably what is the cause of that.
Why did you choose Psalm 46? Was that a choice or?
So it was my choice, and I think funnily enough, there's a song that ties to it, which made it actually more difficult to memorize because the song lyrics are a little bit different than the verse lyrics. But I think it's always good to remember that God is our refuge and strength, especially in hard times. So.
Have you ever studied any other treasurers like Alexander Hamilton or anyone else? And if so, how does it compare to?
Not as deeply. It's hard to compare people to Alexander Hamilton as he kind of built the American economy. I mean, arguably he's still a greater Secretary of Treasury, but
more of a council president than even.
Right. But Andrew Millen, toward the end of his term as Secretary of Treasury, all of his advice that he gave to the president was vetoed, and he didn't actually have any progress in his last 2 years of being president, or not president, Secretary of Treasury.
And which Civil War were you referring to in Sri Lanka? Because there's one after the Colonial Wars, and I think there was one recently.
It was in the 80s.
Yes, it was in the 80s.
There was also one in 2022, wasn't there? Or I thought there was one like recently that there was.
So there was terrorism. Left over from. So that was kind of what I mentioned. It wasn't a full-on civil war, but there are terrorists, and that was kind of. I think that was.
Just there were a bunch of bombings.
Yeah, there were bombings of a bunch of hotels, and if you look at a chart of the tourism, it goes up, and then there's boom, it's totally it gets ruined. And that was where they stopped.
Very cheap, right?
Yeah. But Sri Lanka as a country had to import most of its food. And so if they if they lose the revenue of people coming in to tour their country and being able to export a lot of their goods, they just fall apart. And there were a lot of other things that helped lead to that horrible decision of making the country all organic, which they have currently rescinded upon because all this farmland was going unused and all the people were starving. So.
How did you get it drawn so big on that piece of paper?
So I got my brother to do it, Rob. T-Rex?
What language do they speak in Sri Lanka?
So they speak several different languages. I couldn't list them for you, but I know it's more than one.
Language specific to Sri Lanka, like Sri Lankan or something?
I think the official language of the government is English because it was a colony of Britain, but they do speak a bunch of different languages.
Are there a lot of Indian languages?
Not really, so they don't associate themselves with India, although a lot of people will associate them with India. They very do not like that idea.
Yeah, they would bristle at that idea.
Yes. They're very independent.
Do the people from there travel outside?
Not very often.
Because I don't think I've ever known or met or
Right.
heard of anybody from there.
And especially since as of now, it's a very poor country. Most people who live there couldn't really afford to leave. And there's been a lot of civil war. It's a tricky country to be a part of. I mean, there's a lot of different smaller countries where you may never have met him from. So it's one of those. It's relatively small.
Thomas Meredith, hello.
Hi.
Hebrews chapter 9, beginning with verse 11. But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made by hands, that is, not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God? Therefore, he is a mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. For where a will is involved, the death of the one who made it must be established. For a will takes effect only at death, since it is not in force as long as the one who made it is alive. Therefore, not even the first covenant was inaugurated without blood. For after every commandment of the law had been declared by Moses to all the people, he took the blood of goats and calves with water and scarlet wool and hyssop, and sprinkled it both on the book itself and all the people, saying, "This is the blood of the covenant God commanded for you." And in the same way, he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Therefore, it was necessary for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these rites, but for the heavenly things themselves with even better sacrifices. For Christ has entered not into the holy places made by hands, which are copies of the true things, but into heaven itself, now to appear before God on our behalf. Nor was it to suffer repeatedly, as a high priest enters the holy places every year with blood not his own, for then he would have had to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. But as it is, he has appeared once for all to put away sin through the sacrifice of himself. And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that, judgment, so Christ, having appeared once to bear the sins of many, will come a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. The Spider and the Fly by Mary Howard. "Would you come into my parlor?" said the spider to the fly. "'Tis the prettiest little parlor that ever you did spy. The way into my parlor is up a winding stair, and I have many curious things to show when you are there." "Oh, no, no," said the little fly, "to ask me is in vain, for who goes up your winding stair will ne'er come down again." "I'm sure you must be tired, dear, with soaring up so high. Will you rest upon my little bed?" said the spider to the fly. "There are pretty curtains drawn around, the sheets are fine and thin, and if you'd like to rest a while, I'll snugly tuck you in." "Oh, no, no," said the little fly, "for I've often heard it said, they never wake again who sleep upon your bed." Said the cunning spider to the fly, "Dear friend, what can I do to prove the warm affection I've always felt for you? I have within my pantry good stores of all that's nice. I'm sure you're very welcome. Will you please to take a slice?" "Oh, no, no," said the little fly. "Kind sir, that cannot be. I've heard what's in your pantry, and I do not wish to see." "Sweet creature," said the spider, "you're witty and you're wise. How stunning are your gauzy wings! How brilliant are your eyes! I have a little looking glass upon my parlor shelf. I'm sure you're very welcome upon my parlor shelf. If you'll step in one moment, dear, you shall behold yourself." "I thank you, gentle sir," she said, "for what you're pleased to say, and bidding you good morning now, I'll call another day." The spider turned him round about and went into his den, for well he knew the silly fly would soon come back again. So he wove a subtle web in a little corner sly, and set his table ready to dine upon the fly. Then he came out his door again, and merrily did sing, "Come hither, hither, pretty fly, with pearl and silver wing. Your robes are green and purple, Come hither, hither, pretty fly, with pearl and silver wing. Your robes are green and purple." The end.
So does the spider eat the fly?
Yes. I can actually resume at the next verse. That's what I should do. That's what I should do.
We're in suspense.
Okay. Your eyes are like the diamond bright, while mine are dull as lead. Alas, alas, how very soon the silly little fly came, hearing his wily flattering words, came slowly flitting by. With buzzing wings she hung aloft, then nearer and nearer drew, thinking only of her brilliant eyes and green and purple hue, thinking only of her crested head, poor little thing. Alas, the cunning spider jumped up and fiercely held her fast. He turned around and took her up his winding stair, into his dismal den, into his little parlor, but she ne'er came down again. And now, dear little children, who may this story read, to idle, silly, flattering words I pray you ne'er give heed. Unto an evil counselor close heart and ear and eye, and take a lesson from this tale of the spider and the fly.
Did you draw that?
Yes, my poster's better. Okay. West Virginia. West Virginia is pretty cool. It is nicknamed the Mountain State, and for good reasons. As you can see, maybe, the Appalachian Mountains go all across West Virginia, dividing it from the rest of Virginia, kind of like a giant wall. Its people are nicknamed the Mountaineers, partially because of the mountains, but also because it is unique as a state in the sense that 2/3 of its population live in the country. In most states, the majority of the population lives in the city. Its state bird is the cardinal, and its state flower is the rhododendron. West Virginia is unique in a lot of ways, but the most interesting one is the fact that it is the only state that used to be part of another state. Case in point, Virginia. At the beginning of the Civil War, the Union had many advantages. One of these advantages was the Appalachian Mountains. Unlike the rest of the South, there was a lot of anti-slavery sentiment in the mountains. This was due to a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest ones was that there were almost no slaves in the mountains. Most of the slave owners and slaves all were living in flatter land where there were plantations and things like that. So you had this giant spike into the heart of the Confederacy of Union sympathy. This became very relevant when Virginia decided to secede from the Union and join the Confederacy. And West Virginia, which is divided by a lot of mountains, said, hey, we don't want to leave the Union. Can we not leave the Union? And the Union, of course, said, absolutely you cannot join the Union and become your own state. We would love to have you on our side. So as the Civil War progressed, most of the people in West Virginia went to fight for the Union. And when the war was over, Virginia came back to the government and said, hey, you're not technically allowed to just decide to be a new state, so can we have West Virginia back? And the government said, no. So now we have West Virginia. Yes. I will put this back up in a minute for questions. That's probably too low. But of course. I'm going to talk now about dopamine. If these will unfold. Dopamine is a chemical in your body, especially in your brain, that is incredibly important to how we live our everyday lives. It is important because of this to know what dopamine is, how it works, and why it is so important. So what is it? Dopamine is a chemical that your brain uses to communicate between neural cells as well as between the brain and the body. It is a key factor in many important areas such as movement and memory, and reward and pleasure, cognition, mood, and much, much more. Dopamine is the pleasure hormone, the feel-good hormone, the, oh yes, I like that. That is what it is. It is part of our body's reward system, a system that has been designed so that we are rewarded for doing things that help us survive, such as eating, sleeping, competing for survival, reproducing, and much more. This is something that has helped our species survive over the countless years we have been on Earth. And our brains are hardwired to seek out things that release dopamine. And in today's context, it is very easy to have an imbalance there with all of the technology that we have. When your dopamine levels are healthy, you might feel very happy and fulfilled and motivated. If they are too low, you might feel very low energy and sluggish, unmotivated. You might have a low sex drive or be distracted and moody. You might experience memory loss or many other things. If your dopamine level is exceptionally high, you might experience euphoria, high energy. You might be very motivated and have a high sex drive. You might be very impulsive or very aggressive. It also contributes to issues such as obesity and mania and addiction. Your dopamine levels do not necessarily stay the same throughout the entire day. And one thing you really have to keep in mind when thinking about this is that there are many activities that cause temporary high spikes in dopamine, such as social media, scrolling through anything on the internet for that matter, video games, and other things. What happens when you are constantly looking at these things is your brain becomes desensitized to the dopamine, and your dopamine receptors require more and more dopamine to get that feel good part of it. So, as that happens, the more you stop doing those things, all of a sudden you get all the symptoms of having low dopamine. And so because of those symptoms of having low dopamine, you seek out that dopamine rush again. And you go back and you start scrolling through Twitter or TikTok or something like that. And it is important, if you want to be able to focus and get more work done, to recognize that if you just cut out one dopamine source and replace it with another of high temporary dopamine boosts, that's not really going to solve the problem. If you stop looking at Twitter, but start scrolling through TikTok 2 hours a day, you're not going to see a lot of improvement in your focus. There is a common myth that being addicted to something is the same as being addicted to the dopamine. That is absolutely not true. You can 100% be addicted to the substance, and you usually are. You can also be addicted to the dopamine, however. So the best way to take this and improve your health in regards to dopamine is to reduce the amount of normal, everyday things that you do that cause temporary high boosts in dopamine, while also increasing the amount of slow burning things that increase your base dopamine level, things like exercise. And you can also do things like a dopamine detox, which is several days to a week, where you just completely cut off all of those high temporary dopamine boosts to your brain. So dopamine is a very important chemical that relates to most areas of your life. It determines when you feel good and when you don't, and it is something that you should be thinking about when planning out your everyday life. I'll put my poster back up now. Questions?
Tommy, what are some other low spike ways to increase your dopamine?
Besides exercise? Yeah, sure, there's a lot. Really doing anything that is genuinely productive. There's a difference between feeling fulfilled and feeling happy, if that makes sense. So a good way to do that would be learning something, and constantly doing things with your brain in general is a great way to do that. Another way would be reading. Depends on what you read. You can read things that are absolutely giving you that temporary high boost of dopamine, but there are also a lot of books that are much more slow burning throughout the day that help you a lot. And I couldn't list all of them off the top of my head, there's a lot. But generally speaking, the things that help your base dopamine levels are already touted as healthy things to do. So,
Is exposure to sunlight related to your
I
dopamine
am
levels?
sure it is. I honestly don't know specifically, but I would be surprised if it isn't. Do you have a question?
Do you know fluctuating dopamine levels, is it related to bipolar disease?
Are you talking about fluctuating without a specific cause?
If you're diagnosed as manic depressive, have they ever done studies on your dopamine levels, do you know?
Not that I know of. They might have, but not that I know
Can you talk more about the conversation between Virginia and the government after the war about getting West Virginia back?
of. Sure. Well, I gave the what us young people like to call TLDR, which means too long, didn't read. But I don't know that I have a lot of time to get into specifics. However, Virginia's argument was basically, West Virginia did not want to secede to the Union, so their terms were basically, hey, Union, we'll help you out, make us a new state. We don't want to be part of Virginia. And the Union said, absolutely, sure thing. Which technically the Union can't do, and technically West Virginia can't do. Without the approval of the state government, you cannot secede and join a new state or make your own new state. If you want a modern day example of this, the western part of Oregon, almost half of Oregon actually, for years has been wanting to join Idaho because they are of a very different political standing than the big cities in Oregon, and the big cities in Oregon are determining all of their policies, and they don't like that. So they want to join Idaho right now, but they can't do it. So when Virginia came back, their argument was they couldn't legally do that. And the federal government basically said, well, you couldn't legally secede, so sucks to be you. That's the Best answer I can give right now.
So what's the difference between like dopamine levels today and then like, let's say like 300 years ago? Like, I get that technology thing, because we can get like instant happiness, I guess you would call it, or gratification, or whatever, that word you want to use.
Temporary high boosts, which are not necessarily bad, but when you're just doing it over and over and over and over.
Is it because they get temporarily like excited or enjoyment out of seeing
Yeah.
that thing and then it stops because they're waiting on
So
the
that would be because most of these temporary high boosts are designed from a biological standpoint to come at the end of some kind of, they're not designed to happen often, which is why they're so high. And now we have access to them constantly, and so when we access them constantly, it does not help us.
I heard it explained like a wave pool, and if you have a really big wave, a little bit of water gets splashed out. But then if you keep having tons of little waves, or tons of big waves one after another, after a period of time, there's a lot less water in the tank. And so,
Yes, that's a good way.
so you just need time to replenish, but in today's age, it's just so easy to get another big wave that it's hard to refill.
Any reason why you picked Hebrews?
Yes, you asked. Thank you. I did. So I picked it because, well, first of all, I really liked it when I was reading through various parts of the New Testament for a different reason. I was looking for some other stuff, but I read it and I was like, oh, that's cool. And the reason I thought it was so cool and very interesting and very important is the idea that a sacrifice is needed and that blood is needed for forgiveness of sins is extremely abrasive to today's culture and today's society. But if that were not the case, then Christ's death on the cross would mean absolutely nothing. And it is only because that is the case that Christ's death means something. And it is because of Christ's death that we don't have to do that anymore. The whole point that Hebrews 9 is making is that we need a sacrifice. All of these minor copies of the true sacrifice have been happening over and over to get these shallow purification of the flesh. But what we really needed ultimately was the sacrifice of Christ and the blood of Christ to redeem us from our sins. So that's why I chose Hebrews 9. Yes.
What's a good high spike you can get? Like, what's something that you said
Not
there are
often.
very few, right? You said not often, but
Well, they're not, no high temporary, well, there probably are, there are temporary high spikes of dopamine which are bad, but most of them are not inherently bad. What's bad is the constantly seeking them. So if you watch like 2 really funny 20-second videos a day, right, that's not really going to affect you a whole lot. But if you're watching 4 hours worth of 20-second very high dopamine spikes, then your dopamine receptors cannot handle that and they get very, very desensitized to it. So the area that you would have seen these dopamine spikes in the past would have been food, for example. Especially eating sugar and carbohydrates is a massive dopamine spike. And typically speaking, you would have gotten that dopamine spike after a lot more work. And you would not be able to get it often. But now you can get it very often after no work. So.
And if you win a battle.
As you win a battle, yes. Actually, I mentioned competing for survival. That is a very, very big one. That's why competition is so popular. That's why you have guys watching the television going, oh, yeah, that's so cool, right? And people like to play competitive video games as well.
like winning a race and things like that.
Winning a race, completing a race even. Yes, successfully completing something that you need to complete to survive.
So Tom graduates, and so we don't have a ceremony, a government-sponsored ceremony, but we're doing this. So this year Tom graduates from high school. He plans to go to Northeast State, and he wants to pursue a career in therapy, maybe. We'll see.
Some area of psychology.
So we have the certificate that we're gonna.
Yay!
and to instruct us. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for Tom's life. We pray for his future, that you would guide his steps, direct him in all of his ways. We love him and we commend him to your hands. And in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Okay, stay right there. Oh, it's made it. Okay. There you go.
We have lots of food. We invite all of you to stay and get a snack or a full supper.
Ask us more
Get more